Right, we're live. Hi, everyone. Really happy to introduce PD Lennon. P short for Paula?
That's right.
Great. Do you want to introduce us yourself and your book?
Hello, I'm Paula Lennon. On my book, I'm titled PD, which is a new one for me. My book is a work of historical fiction. It's called The Case of the Mad Doctor. I'm in Jamaica. Unfortunately, I don't have my copy, but Caroline has one to show you. Thank you
There you
very
go.
much. It's published by Canelo Books and came out on the 10th of July. It's set in, well, it starts out set in Bristol, but it quickly moves on to Jamaica, where the two heroes are in search of missing people.
Yeah, it's I loved it. Before we get started,
Oh, thank you. So good to hear.
really big fan. Oh, I was really interested in because you based it on a real case, didn't you? Which I thought was really interesting.
Yes, I happen to be reading a book of poetry by a Jamaican poet named Kai Miller. And on page 47 of the book, it's called The Cartographer Tries to Map a Way to Zion. It's published by Carcanet Press. So on page 47, I came across the poem that was titled Place Name Edinburgh Castle. And, just reading this poem, when I was thinking, what? There was a serial killer in Jamaica in the 18th century, something I'd never heard of before. So I sort of went off and did further research and realized, yes, it was actually true. There was this person. And yeah, he definitely needed a place in a story some way, somehow. So that's how I decided I'm going to write about him. But the truth is that there wasn't that much information about him to be found anywhere. So I sort of put off the idea for a while. How do I write about this man when there's not that much information about him? But then I also wanted to write about a fictional Black hero, a Georgian hero. And I decided, well, I'll make this character someone who's very intelligent and smart and witty, and have him chase down the mad doctor. So you get more of his point of view to how he sees the world while he's chasing this madman from Bristol to Jamaica.
And he's an interesting character, isn't he? Because he's what I like about it is he's sort of got his world in England that he's built for himself, and then he goes to Jamaica and he's in a very different place. And some of how he behaves and responds to people kind of puts him in danger.
Yes, in England he has his work as a law clerk with a barrister, and he's been there for about 5 years training. He's very used to his work. He's got his wife, his two children, and his wife is currently pregnant. He's quite in a settled sort of a lifestyle in England. Nobody's really harassing him for his color. Although some people obviously, they don't like the fact he has a very good job, but they're not harassing him. So to suddenly get thrown into a colony island where just by looking at his color, they don't appreciate the fact that he's a law clerk. They don't really care about that. Some of the people don't. They just don't want him to have any position at all in society. You get to see the character from, looked at from his view of how he sees the poor, the middle class, the aristocrats, and how they view him. And also his companion, his travel companion, an insurance agent who is a white gentleman. It's also how he and Olinu see each other, and how society views them as an investigative pair in Jamaica.
And they grow. One of the bits I really liked is how their relationship grows over the book.
Yes.
Because they're kind of a mismatched pair to begin with, aren't they? And sort of through the book, they develop a sort of respect for each other.
Yes, they from their first meeting at Bristol Dock, which is a bit sort of prickly. They're obviously eyeing up each other, and Olinu is obviously quite worried because he sees this man is instantly looking at him as being the troublemaker, so to speak. So it takes a while. I mean, they're traveling together. maybe about, I think it's 5 weeks on the Isabella. So they're getting to know each other, you know, what they like and dislike about each other until they land in Jamaica, where they still continue to like and dislike each other, but they're obviously drawn together because now they're both facing an island that they know nothing about. And they're on a joint mission to find some missing people that are actually insurance clients. So they're trying to work together while trying to avoid annoying each other. But they managed to do both.
I've got so much more to ask you about this, but where are you going to go next with it? Are we going to see more with Olanu? Are you going to write something completely different?
Well, I've actually, I finished maybe it's a second draft of a follow-up book there. So the two men come back together. So Ashby and Olanu will be back in Bristol this time. So they do make it back to Bristol, and there is an adventure that's being written for them here. So I've just submitted that draft off to the editor. So I'm now sort of waiting to see what he thinks of that new story. But yes, they have a new mystery coming.
Do you see more than just two mysteries with them? Is it going to be? I'll read as many as you write, by the way.
Well, the contract was actually for two, because what happened was that I'd entered a competition that Canelo ran with a company called I Am in Print. That's how the book first came to the eyes of the publisher Canelo, because it took second place in that competition. The competition was for different fiction. As long as you didn't have a contract with a publisher, you could enter your work. So the book that won was I think it's a cowboy romance novel that got published a couple of weeks ago by Avon Books. And then there was my book that was called at the time The Adventures of Isaiah Olanu, which was published on the 10th of July by Canelo. And the person who took third, I can't remember her first name. I think it's somebody Liston. I don't know where her name's gone. But her book was published by, I think it's Chicken House Press. So all three of us managed to get our books out at the same time. And the editor said, can we do two books? Because I think two books initially, this say, depending on how it goes, there might be a third, but the initial contract is for two books, because he was of the opinion that people would actually like these two characters working together and would like to see them appear again. So they should reappear next July.
So for the second, are they going to stay in Bristol, or are they going to travel again?
For the second, they do stay in Bristol. I'm not sure when and where they will travel again. They probably will if they get a third book. But for now, Olanu is now going to be established in Bristol, and he'll also, is working with Ashby. They're together at law chambers. So yes, for starters, they'll be in Bristol, but they may get elsewhere in England, or they may get on another ship. I don't think Olanu's eager to get on a ship at the moment after that exploits in Jamaica, but that may happen.
Because there's a lot of questions. We try not to give spoilers in the group, but I've got so many questions for you next to the book. There are a lot of other characters that we meet, especially towards the end, and I'd kind of be interested as whether you'd ever revisit some of them, like they'd get their own story.
I was actually thinking as to whether or not Dr. Hutchinson should get a story of his own, because he's such an enigma. Nobody knows what he's up to or why he came to be as he was. Sort of, like a Hannibal Lecter story. That there was a whole story about him after The Silence of the Lambs. So there's an idea for writing something about him that I've got back in the back of my mind. Not that I've shared it with anybody yet elsewhere. But there's a lady in there that Ashby meets named Eleanor, who will also return in England, Eleanor Lamont. So Ashby has his lady friend with him. There are some of the enslaved people who I'd also thought about getting them back to England, because one of them, is left to be educated by an aristocrat. And I did think about the idea as well as bringing that person to England to also, what will she see life like in England, being almost treated as a lady, I guess. So I don't know, some of the characters may recur in a later story, but there's none set to be in this story. one that's set for next year.
There's it's another moment that you don't want to give too much away in the book, because everyone should read the book. It's like, it's really good. But there's like moments, I want to call them magical realism,
Yes.
in there. The bold move for a crime book. But I mean, it's wonderful.
Yes, I mean, in Jamaica, even in present day, you know, magical realism is a big thing. Mermaids, a lot of people you speak to believe mermaids exist. I mean, the Rio Cobre that runs through Spanish Town, St. Catherine, that you'll always hear people say they see mermaids, they hear them, that they're, you know, that they're there. They describe them as being, you know, they're dark skinned, they got long black hair, they see them on the riverbed. They apparently, according to those who say they're witnesses, they're protecting Spanish gold, because, you know, the Spanish were here before the English, and, you know, Spanish gold apparently lies on the bottom of the river. So there's always been the existence of mermaids is always seen as, you know, are they spirits, or are they sort of water breathing descendants of slaves? What are they? But they are believed to exist. I mean, the only difference, I guess, is that they're not like the Greek characters where they, you know, they're blonde and they've got their golden combs or whatever. These are, you know, African mermaids with you know, a lot more on their mind. And Jamaicans call them river mama, by the way. So you rarely hear a Jamaican talk about a mermaid. They'll refer to them as a river mama. But they're seen as, some also say, you know, they're there to chase off evil people. So if they see people they know to be bad that are in the sea, they will drown them, or they will do something to drive them away. So there's that element there's there. And there's also the rolling calf, which is another favorite of Jamaicans, who, again, it's supposed to be a ghostly spirit, but people say, you know, that they feel it, they hear it, that the ground rumbles. So depending on who you talk to, you know, some people say they exist and others don't. I guess it's up to the reader as to what's going on here.
But it's great that, like, that is woven in, as well as the history that you've woven in with the, like, the real case. I think it's great that you've woven in, like, the tales as well.
Yes, it was always. I mean, there was actually another creature that was in there that I took out because it was thought, you know, I might get too, you know, into creatures. But I do like the idea of there being, you know, not just dogs and cats and normal animals. There are other things that through the centuries people have said exist, and just to see what people back in the 18th century thought of them. And it's just interesting that some of these, even now, you know, we're back in the 21st century, but these things are still thought to be here. And when you read Jamaican novels, you rarely see them set out there because it's just not a known thing. And even my editor was sort of surprised to come across these things and say, oh, what's going on here, you know, to learn more about Jamaican folklore and Jamaican cultures. I'm really glad I got to put that in a book for people to see what sort of creatures or spirits we have wandering around the island.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of many other things I've read that are set in Jamaica. I think this might be one of the first I've read in definitely quite a long time.
Yes, I mean, I write crime, murder, mystery, contemporary ones that I wrote before this one that are published by Joff Books. And my books, Murder in Montego Bay, Murder Under the Palms, and Murder at Sugar Rush Beach. But they're all contemporary, and there's no magical realism in those. But our biggest star author, I guess, is Marlon James, who I have. He has a book called The Book of the Book of What Women? The Book of Night Women, that's set in the 18th century. That's absolutely brilliant. If you're into historical fiction, that really is something to read. It's not crime fiction, it's literary fiction, but it's also literary and commercial. Very easy to read and just brilliantly written. But yeah, we definitely need to get more Jamaican books out there. So I'm very glad that I could start getting more out.
We've got Laura watching. She wants to know if you had any experts she could go to for your research.
No, I didn't have any experts to go to as such. I mean, the archives in Spanish Town, where there's an archive unit right in Spanish Town Square, actually, right like 2 minutes walk from where the Mad Doctor actually met his fate. there is an archives unit that you can go and look up look up information centuries old. But there are no historians as such that I spoke to, other than visiting the Spanish Town unit. I was straight back to sort of online trying to do research that way, because there are some facilities online. You can find out the physicians, Edinburgh physicians database that you can find online to try and find out who was a doctor around about those times. And as I've said elsewhere, I can't remember where, I made a note of it, I think, in an article I wrote, that his name doesn't appear anywhere. You know, Dr. Louis Hutchinson, you can't find him as a scholar at either Edinburgh University or Glasgow Medical University. So it's not really sure where he trained. So he really is an enigma. So yes, there's mainly online hunting, but no experts.
Do you think he could have made up that he had these medical qualifications, or?
I do actually believe he could possibly have done that, because the sort of person he is, and I think back in those days, even though you only had a quill pen and a parchment, I think it's something that could be done by somebody brazen. If they're brazen enough to kill, they will be brazen enough to plot a way into getting close enough to people to kill them. So I think there's a possibility that he did fake his qualifications, but of course he could be a legitimate doctor, because there are doctors who kill, even modern day doctors that we know of, who've committed murders, like Harold Shipman. So it's not unknown for somebody to be medically trained and then to go off, committing murders. So yeah, he could have been a doctor. He could have trained, elsewhere other than in Scotland. He could have trained in England, perhaps, and then decided to come to Jamaica. But again, no one seems to know why he would decide to leave Scotland for Jamaica and stay. He didn't just go and have a look around and go back. He stayed, built Edinburgh Castle, and seemed to have lived there quite happily, doing what he wanted to do for 12 years.
Did the boat exist, Isabella? Is that a real boat, or did you just invent that completely?
Yeah, there was a ship called Isabella. When I actually wrote about it initially, it was just a name I gave to a ship. There were, lots of ship names. I liked that name. But I then went off and was reading something else and realized, oh, wow, there was an actual Isabella. And that did, carry some Africans around. I think it's from Philadelphia, but or to Philadelphia rather. But it wasn't a name. I didn't pick the name of the ship because I'd read that first. One thing came to the after the other. Then only saying fact and fiction, quite close. But the description of the ship, of course, is like many of the ships of that time, regardless of the name. They were all very similarly, equipped. Passenger ships. This is a passenger ship, but the prior Isabella was not. So there are many ships that are both, some that are just carrying normal passengers that are paying as Isaac Olenu and Reuben Ashby. They're just traveling with other people. And then you've got the actual slave ships. But this Isabella was just, for the book's purpose, was just a normal Isabella.
Did you say earlier that you had some books out previously?
Pardon?
You said earlier that you've had books out previously. This isn't your first,
Yes, this is only my first historical fiction. I've never written any historical work before. I have contemporary novels that I've written that are set in Jamaica, and it's by pure coincidence that the side character to the main character is a Scotsman. That was not planned for me to be writing with a Scotsman, because people might now read these books and think, why is this woman obsessed with Scottish people? But I was not obsessed with Scottish people. I'd never heard of Hutchinson at the time when I wrote my contemporary mysteries. So the lead detective of those books is a Jamaican, and his sidekick is a Scotsman who's sent from Scotland to assist him. And then you've got two female detectives as well. So it's a team of 4. working in Jamaica's police. It's a proper police procedural. So you've got 4 detectives trying to find killers. So I've got 3 of those books. It's a trilogy with Joff Books that came out in 2022. The first one of which is Murder in Montego Bay. So yes, I was writing, and still I'm writing contemporary crime, but this one took me off at a tangent, as I say, just because I read a poem and I thought, my word, I need to write about this man to put him into a book. And that's the only reason why I suddenly verged into historical. But I did find writing it quite interesting and good fun, particularly because you learn so much that you cannot put into the book. You learn a lot about history around the time and the people and the places. That you put as much as into the book to keep it entertaining, but there's a lot also that you keep in your mind that you think, wow, I didn't realize such things were going on, 18th century, both in England and Jamaica.
Yeah, it must be a lot trickier to write historical stuff because you've also got to get the language right.
Oh boy, yeah. The language is a particular issue. While I'm writing, I have to have both the etymology online website open as well as a thesaurus, because a lot of the words that we use now were not used then, or if they were used in a completely different context. And if you were to put them in a sentence and they're read by a historian, they'd probably raise their eyebrows and think, what on earth? Although most people, wouldn't realize. But there were a lot of words that I found I had to spend ages sort of going back to the thesaurus and checking and working out what could be used and what could not. And also things that inventions, to make sure you didn't put in an invention that was not in use at the time. I mean, at one point in a first draft, I had a pram, perambulator, a pram. And there was a little bit of humor around that. And then at some point I did some research and I realized that prams weren't invented for another, I think, 20 or 30 years. So that had to come out straight away. So there's a big difference between writing for the contemporary, where you can just, well, I can't say you do less research, but in a way you do, because phones are there, the internet is there, everything modern is there. It's there. You can write about it. Writing about history, you have to go and check when were these things invented? Were these people around that you're writing about? Were these newspapers around that you're commenting? They're reading newspapers, but were they in existence then? If you want to put famous people in, were they alive or dead at the time? You can't have people speaking who were probably should have been dead 10 years before. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more research to be done. And you do tend to go down a rabbit hole, as I say. You'll find, I was reading about women's prisons the other day, and sort of, instead of just making notes for the prison, I found myself so intrigued by the people who are in there. Then again, it sets you off, can I write a book about that as well? So you're going off on all sorts of tangents when you start doing your research, and have to bring your mind back to, what do I need for this particular book to make it, interesting, exciting, keep the story going.
You made your life really difficult. I actually really enjoy historical crime fiction, but I think it's even more difficult when you start writing in real people, because the doctor isn't the only one who's like a real person that, in the time that you've woven in, is he? So that must be even harder to make sure you get those people right.
Well, that's right. But again, the lucky thing is when not that much is known about them. For example, the aristocrat, there's an aristocrat who appears called Charles Cadogan somewhere in there. And of course, the Cadogans are real people, but there's very little about him anywhere. So it's easy to sort of attribute words or features or statements to him without somebody being able to jump up and say, oh no, he never said that, which they can do with people who are much more popular and well known. So you can sort of get away if they're characters that not much has ever been written about. For characters like, for example, Hans Sloane is not alive in the book, but people make reference to him. For that, you have to be more careful, because there's a lot much more known about him. And you really don't want people to be able to say, well, he didn't say that, or he didn't do that. You have to go back and dig and have a real look as to what he said and did, and what writings he currently has And just make sure, yeah, for people like him, who people know about, that they don't think you're really taking a liberty here. You're allowed to take liberties as an author, but you know, you have to know, you know, where to draw the line, basically. Yeah.
Would you? I mean, you're obviously drawn to writing crime, if like you've done contemporary as well.
Yeah.
What when you started writing, were you always going to write crime, or did that just happen by accident?
I think I probably would have always started with crime because I'm a crime fanatic. I like to watch a lot of TV crime. So, you know, from things like Inspector Morse and Luther and the CSI genre, I'm always watching some sort of crime. Plus, I like true crime stories as well. So I watch things like IDTV, which is just continuous true crime stories. I've always been addicted to them. And I tend to like to read, you know, crime thrillers, whether they're cozies or, you know, sort of proper ghastly and slasher things. Um, so yeah, I think I would always have written crime fiction, and then being in Jamaica, I'm not really sure why I decided to write about a detective in the beginning. I think it was possibly because in Jamaica when I started writing this book, I think it was 2013 or 2014. There was a lot of well, there's still quite a bit of crime in Jamaica anyway. It's not gone anywhere, but there was a lot of stories about detectives, good and bad, true, you know, sort of stories. And I just decided, well, I need to write about one of these characters that make him, you know, sort of good with bad tendencies, as all detectives tend to be, but definitely a hero character, because I've never come across a procedural with a Jamaican detective. And well, no procedural set in Jamaica either, because most of the books set in Jamaica are literary fiction. There's not really genre fiction. I've never come across any really works of genre fiction that get popular anyway, set in Jamaica. So yes, I wrote that first one just thinking, all right, I've got that out of my system. I wrote about a fictional Jamaican detective and his team, and they solved a murder. But the publisher at that time said, oh no, we'll definitely have to have some more of this character coming back. So that team came back for a second book and a third. Although in between that, I switched publishers. So I moved from from Jacaranda Books to Joffy Books. So they're the ones who have those three, 1, 2, and 3. And there could be a fourth if I find time to sit and write it. But they have said to me before, do you want to, you know, resurrect Detective Preddy and let him have another mystery? But that might happen. But yeah, I'm caught up trying to finish the other book first, but may get back to that. But yeah, crime fiction does tend to be my thing. If I'm even writing a short story, somebody's going to die in it. I don't know why. I can't just write straight work of fiction. I don't know. Can't do it. Has to be a gun or a knife or poison in there somewhere.
I guess with the modern one, your challenge would be knowing the procedures, because we all like are quite familiar with police procedure from TV shows and things. But I'd imagine Jamaican police procedure is slightly different.
Yes, but the good thing about that is that, well, back at the time, Jamaicans don't have, Jamaican police service doesn't have that sophisticated gear that the English would have, or the Americans. So a lot of the things that you lot have as standard, Jamaicans do not have. So for example, around about that time, they're still writing in those notebooks. They're writing notes, you know, they weren't doing it on computer. And I can recall at the time actually reading an article in the Jamaican Gleaner by a police officer who was originally from England and he'd worked in Jamaica. And he said that Jamaica was about 25 years behind where he thought it would have been, or where he was with those sort of things at the time. So it's much easier, I guess, to not be challenged. I mean, people in England or in America could not challenge what I'm saying Jamaicans are doing, because I know what they're doing. I can see it. It's being said. It's complained about on the news. You know, why are these people writing in logbooks? And when rain falls and, you know, rain soaks it through the zinc and they can't read it, and you know, this sort of policing is not going to work. So even in those books, I make the point that the detectives are struggling. They've got not many vehicles, or the vehicles are decrepit, or killers have got, much more powerful weapons than they have, and they haven't got the staff and the facilities and the uniforms. So all of that is a big part of those books, sort of showing that the policing that has to be done without um, all the bells and whistles that the modern world has. The Jamaicans do not have it. So it doesn't really cut down on your research. What it helps to do is, I guess, is to draw attention to what's going on in Jamaica. In recent years, it's definitely improved. They're getting much more into technology, and they've got something they launched a couple of years ago called Jamaica Eye. So there's more CCTVs around where there never used to be. That's a very recent thing. So yeah, there's definitely quite a bit of research even for modern crime mysteries or police mysteries.
What's the reception like to your books in Jamaica?
Well, I don't want to say Jamaicans don't read, but they don't read as much as I would like them to read. So even though my books, particularly Murder in Montego Bay, was a part of the Jamaica Library Service National Reading Guide, where they take a few both adult books and children's books and use them for competitions. So people have to read them and answer questions about, well, all of the characters in the tale itself in order to get points. And it was used, Murder in Montego Bay was used for that. And I had hoped that it would encourage, sort of much more buyers. But I think Jamaicans in particular, they'll read online, I think mainly. So they'll buy the Kindle versions. But physical books, you definitely don't see many people reading physical books. The good thing is that those books are in the libraries in Jamaica, so they can get them to read free. I'm hoping that with the Case of the Mad Doctor, the new book, that I'll actually get that into some bookshops. I'm going to make it my business to try, because they seem to be very resistant to physical copies of anything. I don't know. I'll see how it goes with this book when it eventually arrives.
So how do you manage to get out and do, because you've got UK publishers, how do you manage to get out and market your books? Do you ever come over here and do author events? Do you do author events in Jamaica? Do you do...
I've done in England, I did for Murder in Montego Bay, I did a few because I was at a West End bookshop. I think that's West Hampstead, that bookshop. And I did in Brixton. I can't remember the name of that pub now. It's gone out of my. It's not Hogmanay. I can't. Cool. I can't remember, but there's a pub in Brixton where they did the Brixton Book Jam, where I did a reading there as well. And at Clapham, there was a book swap event that I attended. That would have been back in 20. I can't remember when I did that. Maybe 2017. Or 2018. But in Jamaica, I've done, as I say, readings at the library, readings at the hotel, couple hotels in Kingston. Unfortunately, they don't have that many events to do here as they do in England. I mean, I'd love to get onto Calabash. Calabash is our biggest literary festival that happens only twice a year, once every 2 years. So that happened in May. I'd love to get a reading at that, but that's for very literary people, I see. So I'm not sure if I'll ever get into that. So yeah, it's hard for me to get to do events. As I think if I was in England, I would do many, many more. And actually, my publisher has said so. If I was there, there are quite a few things that they'd be able to get me to do. But in Jamaica, it's just it's definitely not. It's not, there's not that many chances in Jamaica. So a lot of what I'll do is online. I do stuff on social media. So, post things on Twitter and Blue Sky and TikTok. Trying to get used to TikTok is something else, but yeah, find other ways to sell. Plus I write articles as well via my publisher. So there was a piece that went in the Scotsman, I think that was last week, about the book. And on Historia, the Historia mag, there is an actual feature article that was went up, I think, on the 10th of July that should still be up for the month. So that's a whole feature about the book and my writing process. And also on the blog, there's a blog for Shots Mag, an e-zine that I wrote a whole piece for as well about my process and how I came to write about the book. So yes, I have to do that sort of marketing that way as well, through writing articles and getting people's attention, since I can't get to do physical things.
Yeah, it's the downside, but you do get to live in a beautiful place.
Pardon?
I said that's the downside, but you do get to live in a beautiful place.
Well, yes, it is, but yeah, you have to trade something, I guess, because to be honest, I'd rather the sunshine and the heat and the blue skies than being in grey London, traipsing up and down trying to sell books. But I guess if I was there, I would sell more. But yeah, there is a trade. I think I'll stay put. I'll come and visit, but for now, I'll stay put.
You got quite a wide range of locations in this book as well, isn't there? They go to a few different places on the islands.
That's right. Yes, they arrived first in Kingston, because Kingston Harbour would have been the main dock for everybody to arrive back in those days. Well, legitimate people, that is, pirates will appear anywhere they want to. They could land on the whole island, but legitimate landers would come to Kingston Harbour. So the scenes in in Jamaica start in Kingston, and then they move on to Spanish Town, which was the capital then. Kingston's the capital now, but back in those days it wasn't. The Spanish Town, Spanish Town was the capital. So they move on to Spanish Town, and then from there they head north up to the north coast to, I think that is Montego Bay. So they come to, which is where I currently am, in St. James. And then they get to St. Anne, before they go back to St. Catherine's. I think about 4 or 5 parishes feature in the whole book. If it was to be set in St. Anne, which is where Dr. Hutchinson had his Edinburgh Castle, I think it would have been way too restrictive, because that is a remote place. It was then, and it still is now. So hence the need to visit some colourful parishes, have the action sort of go all around the island.
Is there anywhere that you didn't use, like a location in the island that you didn't use that you kind of wish you had?
No, really. I think I got in the places that really made sense. I mean, to be honest, Montego Bay didn't have to be in there, but because it's my city, I determined it was going to be in there. So that's the place where the ball would be held. But the main cities, well, there's only 2 cities here, Kingston and Montego Bay. Kingston and St. Catherine had to be there because, as I say, that's where they land in Kingston, and St. Catherine is where all the major events were. That's where the assembly was. That's like the House of Parliament, and that's where all the administrative structures were. So it would make sense for them to get to there, and then Hutchinson's home in St. Anne. So those 3 had to be mentioned. And the parish of St. James, as I say, because that's where Montego Bay is. I was very determined that Montego Bay would get showcased as well. So that's why there's a ball in Montego Bay and not the ball in Spanish Town or Kingston or elsewhere. But yes, I think Jamaica, 18th century Jamaica, got a pretty good showing in those, in all the chapters, really.
No, it did. And I think you were talking about things being quite not quite being literary enough earlier, but there's so many layers to the book that you can kind of unpeel as you're reading. There's like the story, which in itself is really interesting. You've got the different relationships between people and how that's affected all the way through. That's really like intriguing as well. Then you've got the kind of comments on like the various statuses of people. There's like so much throughout the book. Every time you go back to look at it or think about it, you think of something new.
Yes, I mean, when I originally was chatting with my editor about this, well, before he became my editor, actually, because becoming second in the competition gave you a half-hour chat with the editor, didn't give you publication, but I was very determined that I was going to get publication. So we were sort of chatting about the book, and the first thing I said to him was, what is it about this book or what you like or dislike that would make you not publish it, what would have to be done. And we sort of had a chat about various things, and you know they said, oh, we do commercial fiction, and this is actually quite literary. And I'm saying, what? Because I don't consider myself a literary writer at all. I consider myself a genre fiction writer, but that's because I think I gave myself, I gave a I give a description of literary fiction, I think, different from what some other people do. And as far as I was concerned, because I don't write purple prose and flowery language, I just determined that I don't write literary fiction. But I'm told, or I was told by my editor, well, that's not the actual definition. That definition is really, or for some, whether or not there are underlying themes in the book, and it's not just a straight story or work, a fiction. So it's the first time I really looked at it and thought, oh, I guess I understand now that there are literary elements in the book. It's not really just straight commercial fiction. But I do hope that when people sit and read it, they can read it, even though there are dark themes, and not see it as that dark. So there's humor in it to make sure that it's more of you could read it on the beach and still be quite happy. You don't need to sit there trying to study and work out what did the author mean here. It's not that deep. It's a tale for you to enjoy, even though you're looking at dark themes and people who are very sort of underhand or have bad morals. It's still a work of entertainment. I would hate for people to read it halfway through and think, oh my gosh, this is getting really a bit too dark for me. It's not that sort of a tale. It's meant to be kept, keep it light.
Yeah, no, and there's plenty. I think Colony provides a lot of the comedy throughout.
Yes.
The way he responds to people. I love his humor and way he has of talking to people through it. That always, quite a lot of the times, that was what brought me a smile.
Yes, I had to make sure that he was not sort of a downcast character, as he well could have been with some of the things he faced. He had to be quite, sort of philosophical and quite outspoken. I really, from day one, I knew, I could not write a character who was going to sort of yes sir, no sir, and bow. It had to be somebody who could stand on his own 2 feet and speak for himself. And, if he's challenged, he could, respond back. But also to do that without him being too overbearing so that people hate him. So you have to make him, have witty ways and of saying and doing things that make people sort of warm to him rather than, hope that he gets caught by a serial killer. So it was quite good fun writing him, because I'd never come across any character set in any sort of whether it's 17th, 18th, 19th century that is a black hero that has any sort of as a main character as such. It would be a sidekick or even lower, but it's not somebody who's going to be standing up and the one that everybody's looking to, sort of the center of attention of the books. And as I say, it had to be somebody who's intelligent so that his words make sense, and he's not just stating something to to carry the story. He's actually he is the story. And I hope that people who read him as a main character do, sort of enjoy the fact that he is upfront, outspoken, very determined, as well as being, sharp and witty and determined to catch his man.
He's sort of humanized as well, I think, by the fact that he's got his mementos from his children with him. He has moments where he thinks about his family. That even with his other bits that he has brings you, you have a relationship with him because you're thinking about his children.
Yeah.
And things as well, aren't you? You know what I mean? There's those little moments that bring you a bit of a...
Yes, I mean his whole reason for going as such is for his family. He has to do this for his family to he wants it to grow and survive and be prosperous, and he's got his 2 little kids and his baby on the way. He's determined to go away and do great things for them, but he's also worried about them being left behind, and just worried about being in a country far away that he knows no one and nothing about the country. he's obviously going to think about his kids. They've given him these the little mementos. So yes, well, when times get dark for him, he gets to play with these little mementos and think about them. And then also, at points when it gets extremely dark, when it's almost as if he thinks he's at the point of death, and then he really has cause to think about, having left them behind, and he doesn't even have these mementos, and he'll never see his new baby. So he has a lot to think about, unlike Ashby, who was Ashby's unmarried and he has no children, so he's just wishing he was back at church, really. And doing his insurance. He has a completely different mindset to Olinu, which is another reason why they tend to clash, because Olinu has much more on his mind than Ashby has. Ashby is interested only in finding his missing clients as such. And Olinu is interested in surviving for his children and his family and making them, prosperous.
And I think what's interesting is Olinu sort of starts off this fully formed, really rich, interesting character, and Ashby's almost less to begin with. You don't know as much about him, he doesn't have as much that he's interested in, and you sort of grow to like Ashby as the sidekick more from his relationship with Olinu, which was quite nice. Like his journey that he goes on is what draws you to him as a person.
Yes, I think because Ashby wouldn't have had any occasion before to work with somebody like Olinu, like a black law clerk. He wouldn't be used to him, and he's certainly not used to the idea of him speaking to him as if they were on the same social level. So in the beginning, he's quite annoyed by Olinu's speeches and thoughts. He doesn't really like anything he has to say at all. But gradually being in contact with them. I think that probably would happen with most people. You're working with somebody, you sort of start to see eye to eye over certain things because you're working towards a common goal. So even though they will, carp and snap at each other over certain things, that goal is still in mind. So they sort of grow to accept each other's different foibles on the way to finally becoming almost of a united mind to say, yeah, we are working together to do this. We have to do it, to put everything else aside. And then it comes to a point where they can gradually actually sort of share jokes with each other almost. So it was a process getting them together, prickly at the beginning, but they warmed up at the end.
Well, they definitely did. I ask everyone who I interview what they've read recently and really enjoyed.
Well, what I'm actually reading at this moment is because I'm part of a Caribbean crime book reading, also crime reading. We read any sort of Caribbean books, but I'm currently reading a work of fiction by Gillian Royce. It's called The Goat Woman of Largo Bay. It's more like a cozy. So this was published way back, I think, in 2011, but it's only now part of our book reading club. So it's what I'm reading now. And I'm enjoying it, not just because, well, mainly because it's set in a fictional area of Jamaica on the north coast, and I'm desperate to read things about Jamaica. But it's got an amateur detective who is a bartender who has a past sort of criminal history. And I don't think I've ever come across an amateur detective who's a bartender ever in any country at all. Plus, this person, the author, is describing areas of Jamaica that ring true with me, whether it's, picking the mangoes, the colorful Rastafarians, the Obia man. And Jamaica is a proper character in this book, which is what I like to see. And it started sort of, you're getting everybody's perspective at the moment. So you're getting the perspective of the bartender, amateur detective, and the perspective of a mysterious woman that he can see on an island, which Jamaica has little islands off Jamaica. Being an island, there's still lots of little cays, and she's on one with a gun. And a owner of the island who's an American. So you're getting lots of points of view. And it's building, the author's weaving a really nice tale here before we've even got to the first gunshot. So I'm particularly hooked on it at the moment. I've not finished it yet, but it's working up to be a great tale. But I do this is a cozy. I do tend to read cozies, but I do read, sort of thrillers as well. And I actually wrote a thriller a few years ago as well. So I like crime that gets really gritty, as well as sort of low key crime. This crime is more low key, more like it's more tantamount to the number one lady detectives agency sort of books, that sort of a cozy. And I really love those. So yeah, that's what I'm reading now. Something nice and cozy, not a serial killer in sight.
I'm intrigued by you describing her using Jamaica as like a character in the books. I feel like that's something you've got going in yours as well. Like the locations are super important to the story.
Very much so. I do see Jamaica as a character, and back then, of course, it was a character that was a bit, sort of dark. But so you have to portray those sort of the dark things that were going on. There were sugar plantations. There was a lot of enslaved people. There are so that there's so the scenes of enslaved people in the fields, whether they're caring for horses and hay, or whether they're doing the sugar. The scenes of outdoor scenes, for example, where you have those wealthy people prancing around, with their stagecoaches, and they're dressed in all of their finery. I sort of imagine when I'm writing about these people in particular, sort of see them sort of like how Mr. Darcy was, in Pride and Prejudice. So you see all these people dressed up, except they're in a very hot country, and there's not as many buildings around, established buildings. It's much more dry, and Jamaica said to be the land of wood and water. So yeah, there's a lot of wood and water. In between that, there are a lot of people building up magnificent mansions all over the place. So Jamaica is portrayed both as quite a decadent land, as well as being a land, of poor people striving. But yeah, Jamaica's definitely a character in this book.
Yeah, one of the things that surprised me in the book was how far apart things were. So how rural some places were, and like there were little tiny pockets of communities.
Yeah, and I think, believe it or not, that's actually how Jamaica still is, even now. There are some areas that are extremely remote where you don't actually have vehicles that go through there. You probably have some donkeys, or you walk, or you might have motorbikes. Um, and back then it would have been much more desolate, some of the areas, because obviously was it 1655, I think it was, that England took Jamaica from the Spanish. The Spanish had obviously built a lot of places, but the English came and built more. But even then, they weren't building at such a rate as they could have, built up places as we see Bristol or London are today. So there's still quite a lot of remote areas, and they only had horses and carriages, or just the horses, or they walked. So yeah, so in this book there are a lot of carriage riding trips, because that's what they had. They're on horseback, or they're inside a carriage traveling to these remote areas.
If it's the land of wood and water, is there not a lot of use of boats in between places, or is that not?
There's not that many. Well, there is now, but then there weren't. You never really heard tales of people sailing down the river anywhere. Everybody seemed to be set on horses and carriages. I think the boats then tended to be, or the inland boats tended to be for fishing only. They didn't really have tour travel as such in those days either. So there was no, like now we've got lots of little catamarans and boats from one end of the island to the other. Then the people weren't here to sightsee back in those days, or to travel. They were here for the sugar and the rum, really. And they could do that via the whether it's ox-drawn cart or via the stagecoaches, but they weren't really using the river to travel up and down on.
Yeah, that's I mean, which is unusual, because if you think about sort of industry over here, we use canals and rivers and things to transport goods.
Yes.
Quite
Yes, I'm not really sure why, but I mean, I was going to say maybe it's about building them. I'm not sure who was here to be building the sort of boats that would be used as trawlers. I don't know who was doing the building, but there were certainly, you know, shipping carriage, stagecoaches and carriages and traps over here. I don't know. It could also be because maybe there weren't people who were captains as such who could do sailings up and down, whereas everybody seemed to be able to drive a coach on dry land. So that could be the reason.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so I'm intrigued. We've got book 2. Do you have an idea of when book 2 might come out, or?
I would imagine it would be next July, but again, this depends on, I guess, what the editor thinks of it, because he did say to me he'll try and get back to me with his first thoughts by the end of August. So, you know, I've got another few weeks to sit and sort of bite my nails and worry and think, oh my God, he might hate it. What on earth am I going to do if he does? If he doesn't hate it, fingers crossed, then what will happen is he'll give me some notes since, I guess, beginning of September, and I start working on it, and then as long as he accepts, or we come to an agreement that yes, this book is one that will be published once we've polished it, then an announcement will be made. So some announcement, touch wood, should come before the end of the year that this book will be out. Because we have to pick a name as well. I've given him about a dozen names that I think of, and then he'll have to talk to the team to decide which name they like. Because I should say, this book originally, The Case of the Mad Doctor, was not called The Case of the Mad Doctor. Originally, it was called The Adventures of Isaiah Olonu, Esquire to be. And during our conversation about publication, it got changed to The Case of the Mad Doctor.
Will there be, just because it was a thing I really loved, any more elements of your magical realism woven in?
There will be. There are a couple of scenes in this. Well, they're now in England, of course, so this realism is different from what it would be in Jamaica. But there are a couple of scenes in there where there are ghostly appearances, or maybe they aren't. It's as again, it's for the reader to see. But they're definitely there, woven into the narrative. Yeah. But no rolling calves in England, and no African mermaids in England.
Well, I think kudos to writing them in, because I think we need more of stuff like that. I think it's good to have fiction that's exploring interesting ideas and willing to push some boundaries.
Yes, I think so too. I like to see, I mean, I probably wouldn't go so far as to writing something like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but I do like when you got that mash, mix mash in there of different things happening. So it's not straight historical, and it's not, fantasy either, but there are little elements in there for people to sit up and go, oh, what's going on here? I think that's good for a lot of books, and particularly historical books. I think that would work quite well in them.
Yeah, well, I started reading it, and I don't know what I expected. I was like, oh, there's that, and then I got so far through and hit something with the mermaids, and I was like, I'm going to like this.
I'm glad to hear that. But yes, I thought they belonged in there, and I still do, and I think they work quite well. And I wouldn't give away any of the story, but yes, they make an appearance at the beginning, and they make an appearance at the end as well. So they're not just stuck in there for a little bit. They have a reason, and you'll come to it.
Yeah, they definitely needed to be there. Yeah, I think they earned their place.
Okay, glad to hear it. So yes, I hope readers, if you get a chance to pick up The Case of the Mad Doctor, that you'll enjoy it too.
Well, we've got a minute left, so remind everyone who's watching what they're going to go and buy. I'll show them the cover again.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's The Case of the Mad Doctor, and on the cover it will say PD Lennon, not Paula Lennon. It's my first historical, complete with magical realism. Starts out in Bristol, 1772, and moves swiftly to Jamaica, 1772, where they will meet the Mad Doctor.
And also, just before we leave, congratulations on the author description about you seeing sense and returning to live. I was like, You know you're gonna like the author when you read about the author thing, and it makes you
Yeah,
smile.
yes, it is true. I was there in London, grey London, doing my commercial lawyer, but I had lived in Jamaica before, so yes, common sense setting, and I thought, yeah, I can do things elsewhere, somewhere sunny, bright, and where I can smile. So that's why I moved back to Jamaica.
Yeah, I loved it. I was like, you already know you're gonna like a book when you read the author intro, and it makes you smile.
Yes, and then the environment as well. It's good to write in. Sea, sun, and sand really gets the inspiration going. So yes.
And then all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you very much for having me, Carol. I'm glad to have been here, and I hope people will pick up the case of the Mad Doctor.
Yes, I'm sure they will.